I am so glad to be here with you this evening. If you have your Bibles with you, please turn over to John chapter 13. John chapter 13. And where's Alan? Can I pick on you for just a second? I'm so glad that Alan recused himself for the final decision because I've already got 2 strikes against him. Or he's already got 2 strikes against me. 1, I'm a Duke fan, and 2, I was in the Marine Corps. So when he said that, my heart went, ah. I'm just kidding. So back in 2006, I was getting ready to go on deployment to Fallujah, Iraq. And I had found out that my uncle, Bobby, had pancreatic cancer. And so before I left, I made the decision to go by his house and talk with him. And Bobby, being a Meadows, had a stern look, a little bit of a frown on him. And I asked him, I said, "How are you doing?" And of course, he gave the typical Meadows answer, "I'm doing fine." And so I told him, I said, "Well, I'm about to go on deployment, and it's going to be about 8 months. Is there anything you need me to do before I leave, while I'm there, or when I get back?" And he said, "Well, when you get back, make sure you take care of yourself, and you take care of your dad." Not long after that, I got a call from my father in Iraq saying that my uncle had passed away. And still to this day, I remember those words. 2 years ago, November of 2016, I sat at the bedside of a lady by the name of Jean Bagwell. Some of y'all might know her. Sat there, and I did not know at the time it would be the last conversation that I had with her. She told me, in not so many words, take care of yourself and help my daughters get back to the church. Those words still ring so true to me. And as I sit here or stand here and you sit there this evening, all of us have experienced those moments or will experience those moments where we're with somebody in their final days, in their final hours, and their words will mean so much to us because they love us and we love them, and we want to follow through on the words and I guess maybe commands, so to speak, that they give us as children, as grandchildren, as brothers, as sisters, as friends, as neighbors. And the same thing is true here in John chapter 13. John chapter 13 to John chapter 17 is the last conversation that Jesus is going to have with the closest people that he's known in 3 years. And they don't know it, but he does. And those are so foundational, and those are so important because what Jesus unpacks for his disciples in John chapter 13 is the one instance where Jesus says, "I leave you with an example." It's the one instance where from John chapter 13 to John chapter 17, these are the words that are going to penetrate the minds, the hearts, and the lives of the disciples. This is the section in John chapter 13 through 17 that will carry the disciples not just through the despair of Jesus being gone, but through the mission of establishing and spreading the gospel, creating the church. And so that's important for us still today in the 21st century, specifically given the time and the place and the culture that we live in. And Jesus gives this command, this statement. This is the one point that you need to understand and that needs to be driven into your heart, into your mind, because it is so foundational and monumental, not just to what's going on individually in each one of our lives, but collectively what's going on here at Indian Land. And so in John chapter 13 it states, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world, the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During the supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him." So here's the background. Here's the backdrop of what's about to take place. See, this is the last feast that they're going to have. It's the time of the Passover. And the author tells us that this is the point in which the devil has infiltrated the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray Jesus Christ. And Jesus, in verse 3, knows this. He knows that Judas is about to betray him. He knows that the scene that's about to unfold is that famous scene that we've all heard about. Maybe we've even seen in a movie, where Judas betrays the Lord, ironically, with a kiss. And so what does Jesus do here? What could Jesus do here? If you knew that somebody was about to stab you in the back, what would the first inclination be? What would the first thought be? And what would you actually do the next time you saw that person? See, what Jesus says in John chapter 13 is this: to love is to serve. That to love is to serve. And Jesus in verse 3 states, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. Uh-oh, he's going to rise from supper and go over there and just cold cock Judas. I mean, that's what we would do if we had the information available. He's going to go over there and give Judas his 2 cents. That's what we would do if we were there. But Jesus rises, and notice what happens. And he laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, he tied it around his waist. And then he poured water into a mason jar, or a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with a towel that was wrapped around him. Now, see, sometimes we gloss over that little section right there. We say, well, it was all the disciples except for Judas. No, that's not what the text says. That even in knowing that Judas was about to betray him, Jesus still loved him enough to wash his feet. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I'm not a big feet person. I've never actually washed somebody's feet, and I don't know that I would if you asked me to. But isn't that the big difference between us and the Lord? That if we're going to adopt the motto that to love is to serve, we don't get to choose who we serve. See, this is the one time, or verse chapter 2, verse chapter 11, and verse chapter 21, the author makes note that Jesus knows who's about to betray him. That Jesus understands that that's what's going to happen. And he washes Judas's feet. That just seems so not typical of anybody at any point in any time, because the way in which we're told and taught and structured in our society is that you don't serve your enemy, that you get your enemy down and you stomp on their throat until they either give you what you want or they die off, so to speak. See, that's what the culture says. That's what the world wants, but that's not what Jesus models. See, there's a huge difference between what the world classifies as love and what Jesus classifies as love. The world classifies love as everything that you can do to get what you want, with who you want, however you want, as long as you don't hurt anybody. Jesus says, if you want to see the true model of love, serve your enemy. Pray for them. Forgive them. And that's exactly what Jesus does here. He loves Judas. Therefore, he serves Judas. But then you have another peculiar situation that takes place with our famous person named Peter. Peter. If there was ever a guy that needed a disease named after him, it was Peter, called foot and mouth syndrome. I mean, that happened, and I think that we relate to Peter so much because we're so much like him. And notice what takes place. Last conversation that they'll ever have, and Jesus takes the position of a servant, even though he is the great master. See, in that time frame, it was the slave that was the one that washed the guest's feet, that washed the master's feet. Nobody ever thought that a master would ever get down on his knees and wash the grimy, dirty, sweaty, dust-filled feet of the people. And so Simon Peter, at verse 6, it says, he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Why are you doing this for me? Why would you take such a lowly position? And in essence, Peter is saying in verse 8, you shall what? Never wash my feet. See, Peter missed the big picture. That Peter thought that this act was beneath him. Peter thought that this act was a deplorable act that Jesus was partaking in. But what Jesus was doing was setting an example for them, so that they would follow through with that towards each other and towards the outside world. That's why, when you look in verse 9, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, or in verse 8, Jesus said, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. And then the light bulb clicks. And Peter says, in a Peter kind of way, Lord, not my feet only, but my hands and my head. Well, if you're going to clean me, clean all of me. And Jesus said to him, the one who has bathed does not need to wash except his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean. See, isn't that what happens when you come in contact with Jesus? That when Jesus says you're clean, you're absolutely, positively clean. But I want you to hone in on Simon Peter, because so often we think about him saying, no, you're not clean. But do you understand what he was really saying? Do you understand what he was really doing? See, when he denied Jesus the ability to serve him, he was denying Jesus the opportunity to love him. And when we deny our brothers and sisters the opportunity to serve us from a standpoint of pride, we deny them the opportunity to demonstrate Christ-like love. Because we live in a culture that says, do it yourself. We live in a culture that says, I've got to have it my way, my time, and that I can pull myself up by my own bootstraps. That might be the world's way. That's not Jesus' way. And so think about that. The next time somebody offers a helping hand, what are you saying when you say, no, don't help me? And that's exactly what Peter was doing. And that's what's required if love is actually going to serve. It's the requirement that the person on the receiving end lets the other person love them with that agape love. And notice in verse 12 it says, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I've done to you? Well done, Jesus. You wash your feet. You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do just as I have done to you. And it wasn't specifically the washing of the feet, but Jesus used a bold example to show them the type of love and service that they should demonstrate towards each other. See, it's far too easy in any aspect of life to simply say, all I need is me. And you guys might know people that are like that. And maybe one of the things that we've lost in the church universal is the ability or the desire or the want, not just to serve, but viewing service as an act of love. Because too often what service is in the world that kind of penetrates into the church is, I'll serve you, but understand you owe me one. But understand, I've got it in the back of my pocket, right here marked, one. It's on the tablet right there of my heart, that as I serve you, it's expected that when the time comes, you are required, if you're going to be holy, to serve me back. But what if service was simply something that was done without the expectation? What if service was something that was done from the position of agape? And that's why Jesus asks the question, because he says it's not about the foot washing. It's about the love that's been demonstrated. That in a little while, I will not be here. And the people that are going to be the people that are going to, show that to the world and show that to each other. If this thing called the church is going to be whole, if this thing called the church is going to be a community, if this thing called the church is going to be unified, it has to be something that comes from the depths of the soul, not just an expectation because, well, you scratched my back. That means I guess I got to scratch yours. And it says in verse 16 on top of that, truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is no greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who has sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. He says, you are approved by God if you do what I've shown you. And I'm not speaking of all of you. Obviously, he's speaking about Judas, of whom I have chosen, but the scripture be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I'm telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. He says, hey, I'm going to be betrayed, and you're going to be discombobulated, you're going to disperse, you're going to be grieved in the heart, but if there's one thing that I want you to know, it's that to love is to serve. And notice the end of the chapter and how it connects to this section in verse 34 and 35. And this is a rare thing that Jesus says. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. Well, what image? What's the last imprint on their mind that they can draw from? It's certainly what took place between verses 1 and verses 12 with the foot washing. It's certainly the thing that they remember. And so, verse 35, by this all people will know that you are my disciple, if you love one another. Notice what the text doesn't say. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have a really big sign outside the church building. Notice what it doesn't say. By this all people will know you're my disciples, if you fill it up every Sunday, but don't show love. Notice what the text doesn't say. By this, all people will know that you're my disciples if you've got a website. By this, people will know that you're my disciples if you dress in the suit and tie so people know around you that you're going to church. See, you can do all of those things. If you don't have love, you're not the church. And so, if to love is to serve, then the mindset of service may require a change in thinking. So, this is how we normally get out of serving, right? We come across as genuine, and we say this. You prepare for this? This is deep and this is theological. If you need me, call me. See right there? Greek study. Right there. John chapter 13. But isn't that kind of like the default position of saying, well, if I've got to serve you, it's on you to call me, but I kind of don't, but I don't want to come off as a jerk, so if you need me, call me. But what if we simply just met the needs as we saw them? What if we erase the mindset of, well, hey, do you need me over there for that thing that you're doing? What if we just saw it and did it? Because when Jesus was on his way to the cross, he never looked out to the crowd and said, if you need me, call me. Jesus never looked out and said, hey, do you need me to to come over there and wash your feet? Or do you need me to come over here and meet you in this situation or circumstance that you're in? Hey, lady that's caught in adultery, do you need me to talk to these Pharisees over here? Well, if you need me, I'll be right over here. You just call me. What if Jesus said, if you need me, call me? See, Jesus didn't say, if you need. Jesus said, I am. And what's so interesting, and this is the practical application here, maybe what that looks like for your life is this. Maybe I'm riding through the drive-thru, and I just pay for the person behind me and just leave them a card, leave them a note. Maybe I know the needs that are within this assembly. And instead of asking, do you need me? Or, hey, do you need anything? I recognize the need and I simply meet the need when it's there. Maybe it's one of those things where I see somebody on the side of the road holding up one of them signs. I don't worry about whether or not they're going to use it for drugs or alcohol, but maybe I just say, hey, can I buy you a burger? And buy them a burger. Because what that demonstrates to people is not this undergirded, hey, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back service that we see in the world. It demonstrates to people that we love them, so we serve them. And it's by that people will ask a question like this: why on earth are you helping me? You didn't have to do that, but why did you? And that's where we can point them back to John chapter 13 and say, these were the last words that Jesus ever said to his disciples. And while I wasn't there, and while I wasn't privy to that intimate setting that was there on the day of the Passover, I am one of them. And if I'm going to be one of them, I need to be like him. Now this part right here isn't in the notes. I appreciate each and every one of you for taking a bold step to plant the church in Indian. And this isn't so I get good grades on the assessment. It's not. You're laughing, but I'm serious. I would say this to you regardless of the situation or circumstance. But I can promise you this, that this place will succeed or fail on the basis of how much you love one another. And the moment that love is evaporated, the moment that love turns into, well, what program can we do? Or the moment that love turns into, well, hey, we need to build a bigger monster. Or, hey, we need to have a bigger sign. Or, hey, how can we get more people in here? And you neglect the service out of love, you're going to fail. If you harness the love that is seen in John chapter 13, there's nothing that he won't do through you individually, collectively. And that is something that all of us should strive to have in our life. Because not only will the church grow, the community will take notice. See, here's the thing. This is one of the questions every congregation needs to ask themselves. If the doors shut tomorrow, would the community know and would the community care? But if you are loving and that love is translated into service both for each other and to all people, the community will care. The community will know. And because of that, the church will grow. But most importantly, maybe, you yourself will change. Because guess what? When I don't get to choose who I love, and when I don't get to choose who I serve, you know what happens? I meet some peculiar people. Just 2 months ago, over at the Starbucks at Gastonia, I had a conversation, because I bought a coffee for somebody, a conversation with a transgender lesbian pagan. First question, why did you do that? And then I want you to ask me some questions about Jesus. And I don't say that to toot my own horn, but when you don't get to choose who you love and you don't get to choose who you serve, your own prejudices and your own walls are shattered and torn down, and the only thing that can fill that void and that gap and those prejudices is Jesus. Amen. So this evening, as we sit and I stand, what's going to be different tomorrow morning with regards to your love for one another and the love and the service that you show the community? Because we can sit, I can stand, I can give a good sermon and everybody say amen, and tomorrow we can just run through the motions of being a Christian. Or we can choose to love and serve. So if there's a way, and I don't know how you guys do it here, so I'm just going to roll with, Gastonia 101. But if there's a serious need tonight in this awesome setting, surrounded by a bunch of brothers and sisters, where you're safe, where you're secure, where you're loved, let it be known so that people can serve. Would you make that known this evening as we stand and as we sing?
Somebody's calling my name.